What's up, Earth Speed? Welcome to Man-UpRite. I'm sitting here with Akira Chan, Joshua Wenner, and Preston Smiles, all amazing men in their own right, but also part of my men's group. I'm so excited to sit down and have this conversation about being better men. Wait for the plane.
Start.
Hurry up and wait.
This tree is so pretty, man.
Gentlemen, thank you for showing up. Welcome to Man-UpRite. This is a series at Earth Speed about personal development, men's work, and how we as men can show up better for the world. So who better to ask to come beyond this than you, my brothers? We're all in a men's group together, so it's of course really important to me that you are the first to present this series, because you've been such an important, integral part of my personal growth over the years and have been there for me as I attempt to level up as a man.
Yes.
So we're going to attempt in the next hour to just flow through some conversation around your relationship to this work, and how you got into the men's work world, and how we can invite the audience, all the men out there and the women who love those men, to wake up, first of all, become aware, step up, clean up, show up, and make the world a better place.
I don't know if the world needs to be a better place.
All right, here we go.
Can we be sure that the world needs to be better?
Okay.
And do we believe that the onus is on men? Is it?
Yeah.
Because how we met was you did a rebuttal to something I said at Burning Man. I was doing a talk, and I said that a bunch of well-meaning mothers unconsciously traumatize their sons in such a way that it has boosted up the porn industry and sex trafficking and a whole bunch of other things, because they've unconsciously tried to beat out the parts of the masculine that they didn't like in their partners or the men that abused them in some form or fashion. So,
the only other different side is I have a belief that we are the problem and we're also the solution. Yes. So on that same conversation, like the women had to do it because we went to work, and the men went to work in the Industrial Revolution, and instead of actually being there to take men on a rites of passage, to teach them how to be men, we went to work and essentially were busy working, and so the women were left to deal with this conversation. So I think it's a both.
But ultimately, to Preston's point, it's all about language, right? We have to watch our language, and it's hard because we're conditioned to use language in a certain way, but and put it on a hierarchy, better, worse.
Fair.
What is developed, what isn't developed. We're on a spectrum, we're on a growth trajectory. So, yes and.
yes.
Great. Yeah.
This particular group, we didn't even, no one put a flag out and said, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to be as a group of men. It did happen, in my perspective, from a place of friendship and invitation, and then we each had to kind of make that own choice.
Yes.
Like I was a pretty instant yes, but that's because of the safety and friendship I had with some of the men in this group. Maybe 2 years earlier, maybe even a year earlier, I might not have answered. I would have pretended that text didn't come through because I wasn't looking for that. And I think I also might have told myself, like, I don't, like, it's just too much. I don't need it.
Or you might have judged it in some way, like, oh, that men's work stuff, like, I don't need that. Yeah, I used to do that. I used to poo-poo people in personal development space and make fun of them. Now here I am, look at me.
Deep in.
But no, there's coping mechanisms. There's a way to keep your status quo intact, right? Like, I don't want to have to challenge myself in these ways, so I'm going to reject it wholesale.
I agree. And I think a part of that is because we've been conditioned through Rocky and wrestling and all the film and television that we've consumed, including the damage that you've done to the world through Entourage.
Of course, this is always going to come up. Yeah.
Yes. Including the damage you've done to the world in such a beautiful way. That the idea of working on oneself, the idea of uplifting oneself hasn't been popular. It hasn't been sexy. And so, of course, men, boys, don't want to go into a space that typically through, TV, film, music isn't popularized. The moment we make this stuff, which we are doing, which you are doing, which we are doing, the moment we make this stuff accessible and dope to the layman regular guy, everything will shift.
Yeah, I think that we're getting into a confused space where we get stuck on language, right? Like when we started there, right? Are we trying to get better? Just for the most colloquial use of the word better? Do we want to choose what we want to strive for, which is not where we are, to improve ourselves? I mean, these are triggering words, right? Improve, what does that mean? And in this day and age, even the language around masculine, feminine, what is a man, what is a woman, like all of these things are so triggering in society. People dig in and get defensive about what that means, or what it doesn't mean, or what it can't mean. And is it defined or not defined? So I just want to give us permission to define it. What is better? What is a better man? What does it mean to man up right? Like, not just, well, everything is everything. Because then you get into this relativist state where you're not actually striving. And I believe part of the masculine energy is direction, is clarity, is boundaries, is defining what it is. So just to give us permission to be very clear and very deliberate about what we're saying. And obviously everybody can throw it out and the audience can just negate it if they want in a heartbeat. But in this moment, what is it?
I would want to invite us to talk about the difference between an adolescent man and an adult man. I think we're missing this rites of passage, and that's what the tribes had. At least from the lens that I look through, we're missing initiation and being around other men to show us. It used to be in tribes we were taken out about 13, 14 years old, and the men would take us in the tribes for 18 months, and we would be with men, and we would hunt with men, and we'd see them laugh together and play together, and then they'd bring stories back, and they'd teach us this is what it means to be a man over time. And then we had a rite of passage where we went through an initiation process to then prove ourselves as a man. And then when we came back, we were then this adult man that we believed and the tribe believed, until the Industrial Revolution came and it all shifted. And so from the lens I look through, in order to do that, we have to define what is the difference between an adolescent man and an adult man. And I think part of it involves community of men, which most men are lone wolves, because that's what we've seen in movies. Like every major movie is this lone wolf usually walking around. So I think it's defined by community that holds you accountable to a higher purpose. I also think we have to define what does it mean to be an integrated, potentially adult man.
That delineation you were talking about, where you actually cross over through some kind of rite of passage, some kind of ritual. Preston, I know you recently did a vision fast and spent time out in nature, and that's a rite of passage later in life, right? But I feel like that delineation, that was missing for me, and it's just a product of us growing up in American culture where that's not built in. What does it mean to be a better man for me? It's having a really good idea of where you were, where you are now, and from there, knowing where you're going. And I feel like these rituals, those allow us to move through that space with some perspective.
So how's this sound? Personal development is owning and tracking your own personal morals and values over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So not being immediate and myopic, but seeing your whole life unfolding from your past into the future so that you can own and manifest with authority.
I wouldn't disagree. I would just add that to me, awareness precedes choice. And so a conscious man, a man, when a man is right with himself, his world is right, will always come back to awareness, right? And how aware am I of the choices I'm making? And even though some of those choices may hurt myself, other people, the planet, if I have the wherewithal to look back at it to reflect. Then I now have an opportunity to repair. And that repairing and reflection is to me, one of the biggest pillars for what it means to be a good man or a conscious man. Yeah.
So bringing awareness,
That.
first and foremost.
Yep.
And a lot of these immediate indulgences actually take us away from awareness. They blind us, they numb us, they put us to sleep.
Well, immediate is okay. It's okay, period. But it's more than okay if I'm doing it from conscious awareness, right? To me, it's less about me eating the cookie now, or, you know, let's take a guy going to a strip club, which I don't enjoy, right? I have my judgments from where I sit. But let's just say a guy going to a strip club, he walks in that strip club not to get his cup filled, not to indulge some part of him because he can't be with the discomfort of his own life. That is very different than a man walking in there and saying, I would like to enjoy seeing the feminine express to music. I'd like to be in this primal state with somebody who's a professional at the thing they're a professional at. Those are two different things. And so I think it's less about whether somebody is making fast choices or delaying, and more about the consciousness that they bring to that decision.
Yeah, for me, I see it as like three different pillars. I feel like one, we use a metaphor a lot of times that we're bleeding all out. We all have pain. Like we move from childhood to adolescence because of a wound. So initially we're bleeding out, and that's why we look for numbing behavior to cope with the pain. The greater the pain, the greater the pleasure. But we have to first become self-aware to recognize what's happening and then take ownership of that. And then two is what you were saying, is the habits and practices to actually give ourselves what we need, the self-nurture and care to give ourselves what we need in order to fill that gap instead of the bleeding or the pain area. And then once we can do those, then I feel like the third area is service. And like, how do we convert service, which is actually meaning, is what's my gifts to give to the world? How do we actually take we're basically mining vitality. And when we become what we are to give to the world, then we have to go give it. And I think that's where we're at, is we're in different stages of men's work of either becoming aware, moving through putting habits and practices, or encouraging each other, like how do we move that into vitality and serve the world? And it could be serving our family. You could say, I'm gonna be the best father. We would be a much better world if they said, my purpose is to be a father, and I'm gonna be the best damn father that's out there. That's amazing, right? Or somebody said, I can get in politics and I'm gonna change the system. So once we do it, I believe it's our mission to then give that service.
So the premise of the show is it relies on the fact that we believe that men need other men, and we need to elevate, we need to be better. Because most of us aren't going to strip clubs consciously. I mean, strip clubs, I would say, are established on unconscious indulgence.
Yes.
And I can imagine what a conscious strip club might look like, but it might be different. It's not just the men going in, but also the women and how they show up, consciously or unconsciously, sexually. But point well taken. So in this society, otherwise we wouldn't need to do this, right? We wouldn't need to talk about this. We are lucky. This is a blessing to have men that I trust to show up for me in the best possible way, in support, to challenge me, to hold me to account, which I never had. Most people don't have that, right? So on their way to the strip club is someone saying, hey, are you doing this consciously or unconsciously? So you all are doing this on some level in your own lives, right? You have made this your mission to help people elevate. Do you see that there's that need? Do you see that there's a lot of men that need this kind of work?
I do. We are social beings. We need each other. We learn from each other. I have 4 children under 5. And I watch my youngest 1.5-year-old look at the 3-year-old twins and their 5-year-old brother and envy what they're doing, right? When he takes their toy and they smack it out of his hand and take it back, they're teaching each other. They're growing each other. And so, to me, this is exactly what is necessary. We're just returning back to what is naturally, we're just returning back to what we've always been and always desired. I think that when people, you know, get into sports and things of that nature, this is what they're looking for, right? They desire to experience life together. We all want to enjoy life. We all want somebody, a shoulder to cry on. We all want somebody to challenge us, to play better, to be better. Because otherwise, what are we doing here, right? Life at some level can be extremely meaningless. And I think that one of the reasons why the suicide rate is so high in men and boys in particular is because of that. Is because they haven't been trained, you know, well-meaning sort of, you know, Homer Simpson type dads who went down the path of, you know, bootstrapping their way to the top as bankers or whatever the case may be, have lost that primal aspect of themselves, and so they can't pass it to their sons. Their sons are in sports and playing with other boys whose dads are exactly the same, and there's this cycle that keeps continuing, and I think it's a part of what the universe, God, Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, whatever we want to call it, I think that that thing that is beyond our current cognitive understanding is birthing these pockets of men to help us remember how to do this. So I think Josh's company and what he does with men is a part of that. What I do with men, women, boys, girls is a part of that. What you've stepped in and this show is a part of that. How you hold your son and how you hold your media company is a part of that. It is literally like, to me, future generations and higher selves and ancestors saying, come on, y'all, come on back home. Come on back home.
Yeah, just to add on to that, if we look at anthropological, when we go back in history, like if we look at, we actually can't survive without each other. Like wolves, if you study the history of wolves, when a wolf is howling, he's howling because he's about to die. If he doesn't find a tribe, he dies. So if we look at us as men, when you actually study men, I think the suicide rates and the mental health that's skyrocketing is because we're missing each other, because we've been shown, what does a man do? He isolates, he handles things on his own, he doesn't show any emotions, and he just finds a way through, versus when you have community and you create safety and accountability. I think those are both needed. Like that's what I love about us is you come in and say, you know, I'm in it, and guys will hold space for you or ask questions or get curious so you feel safe. Or instead of running and isolating and hiding, or they'll also challenge you if you need the challenge. So I think we need the community, from what you're saying, to actually come back online, to feel safe again. And when we're safe, our body starts to relax a little bit versus constantly being in this fight or flight stress response. Because when you're alone, you're in a heightened response. You're always on guard looking for threat, and that eventually kills us.
I've talked about this in our group because we communicate a lot. We get together in person, those of us who are local, and we have our retreats, but we are communicating on this device, on this app, where we're constantly sending each other videos. And we've seen, you guys watched as I was with my mother on her deathbed. I brought you guys into that experience. We've seen births, deaths, new relationships. And for me, one of the things that was a big aha moment for me was that space, and just the space of this men's group was a safe place to be dangerous. And I like that because the conflict is what I seek, because I am always so, I think you've called me Switzerland before. I'm like, I like to be diplomatic. I'm just like to be grounded and peaceful. But on the other side of that is this deep fear, uncertainty, and desire to have healthy conflict, and to step into a space where it is safe to be, to play those other notes that I thought might not be me, out of character, or a little bit dangerous or risky, or might cause some confrontation. And this is the first time in my life that I've been able to do that with other men, versus just moving on to calmer waters and relationships.
I relate to that. Talk about well-meaning mothers. My mother never had any positive male role models, so she had a displaced sense of what men would be in my upbringing, and she rejected them as a woman and then rejected them from our lives. So I never really had strong, not brute, but constructively masculine roles, men in my life, and in many ways emasculated me as well, to make me safe so that I didn't hurt others like she was hurt. Yes. And I've had to relearn or learn how to be more aggressive. And not to say that being aggressive or violent is what a man is. It's having access and the capacity to be violent, which I think is distinctly masculine. Not that you would use it unconsciously or destructively, but to know that you have that capacity creates a certain sense of safety for yourself and for your family if you need to protect yourself from a threat. So I'm also learning how to be a little bit more dangerous
in a safe space.
And what's beautiful about that is all of us have created coping mechanisms and strategies to stay safe from childhood. And while both of you created those as a way to stay safe, right? The one that I created was more around aggression and pushing people away and fighting my way out of spaces and or just disappearing. And what you guys have brought to me is a sort of co-regulation, a different way of viewing life, a different way of, a different lens. And it's not that you're teaching me directly, it's just who you're being. It's just who you're being. And that, to me, is how we learn. Whether we're aware of it or not, I think that there's an evolutionary impulse for all of us to evolve. And when I see the demonstrations of manhood daily, right? We are truly gifted and blessed. We talk every day. I see how you navigate your world. I see how you navigate life. I see how you deal with conflict. And I look at that and I go, oh, I want some of that. And I'll try some of that on today. And I'm able to pick and choose because I have these demonstrations that I'm so intimately connected to. And I think, to me, truly, all of us are looking for intimacy. We're looking for the conscious mom or dad we never had, or the one we did have, reflected in 100 faces.
I'm just connecting the dots from what we started with around the conversation of initiation. So I think we're, on what you were mentioning, we're all a generation of not seeing what it's like to have a bunch of flavors of healthy masculinity for a whole culture.
Truth.
So we're now in a state where we're having to learn and implement. And so to reframe men's work, I think men's work is the movement of reclaiming masculinity in a healthy way. What does that healthy look like? We're defining it by seeing flavors of masculinity going, oh, here's a little bit too far on the fight side. Here's a little bit too far on the freeze side, because freeze becomes nice guy. So we're learning, oh, how do we do this in a loving way? When we do go offline, how do we have compassion? And how do we repair really quickly? In the modeling of a bunch of men, you see the sides you don't know. And you're like, oh, that's how they do it. And then you watch it happen, and then your nervous system relaxes a little bit, and then you feel safe enough to jump in knowing they're not gonna leave. And I think that's part of it, is the safety to know we got you, we're not going anywhere.
Yes.
Like, come out a little bit more, because you have to have the other side to go claim what you want, your kingdom, what you're creating in the world. You can't do it unless you are initiated. So we're helping to essentially father ourselves, and then father each other, which is the initiation process. And then when we can do that, we can father our sons, each other, and then we can spread that by our way of being, right? Because we're becoming the examples.
I love modeling it, right? Because I guess old mentality that's more widespread and accepted of masculinity is a tyranny of absolute what it is. And, you know, it's like, this is the way it is, this is how you're gonna be, versus allowing us to stumble through exploring the possibilities, as opposed to it being an answer that we have to conform to. We can allow ourselves to explore more openly with the range of possibilities. And not to totally reject our well-meaning mothers who wanted us to be safe, right? It's not that my mom wanted to emasculate me so that I was unsafe in the world, but that she just didn't want me to be destructive. God bless her for that. Now I have that awareness, so I can step back into the dangerous part of myself and sheathe the sword and not wave it around and hurt somebody. So, yes, modeling.
When I look at that example, if she would have seen healthy masculinity displayed of both healthy danger and healthy safety, she would know that better. Right. So, and also I think there's the women that are like, we're up leveling as men, and there's some ranges on the men that are angry and aggressive. And I see the same thing with women, is how do we start to appreciate and reclaim it now?
While this is a men's focused series, that's not to say that women don't also have themselves to, you know, raise up.
Yeah.
They got a lot to raise
on the
up.
starting line. He's like ready to pounce.
No, go for it.
But we're not here to tell them. We're not
no.
here to mansplain.
No.
You guys deal with you. We're dealing with us.
Yes, because the point is for us to have a divine union, right? A sacred union where nobody's shaming each other for these archetypes that we can never fulfill because they're fantasy standards that don't work anymore. And men's groups and men's holding each other, loving on each other is like being lost at sea for, you know, 30 days or whatever, and then finally seeing the shore, right? You see there's land there, but you're tired and you're doggy paddling, right? And like, to me, men's groups are the makeshift boat that gets us from there to the shore. When we get on the shore, we still have a whole nother set of work, right? Now we're dealing with what's on the land and what's there. But I think there's a baseline that all of society, but especially men, are being with. And, you know, I lead workshops all over the world. And whether it's Costa Rica, anywhere in Africa, Canada, US, Australia, literally everywhere in the world, there's a process that we do where we invite people to share things that they hold shame and guilt around. And no matter what, no matter where we are in the world, 80% of that room has been traumatized through sexual abuse. I think it is literally the biggest hidden, not talked about thing in the space. Men have been abused sexually, and then they go and do it. And I'll be the first to put my hand up. When the Me Too movement happened, there was at least 20 things that went through my head of like, oh, they're coming for you. Because you did that too. You did that. You grabbed that girl's butt when you were 14 on the bus. You did that thing when you were in college where you were drinking too much and you came on too strong. And I just started going through all these things. I'm like, wow, this is so deeply entrenched. And so many things have occurred to me, even in the film and television space. Right? When I was modeling for Wilhelmina, I would go do these jobs, and it was like well known that these photographers, these men photographers, are gonna try to get you. And like just having to navigate all that, I think it's like the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about, sexual abuse. So I just want to put that there to say, to me, when we start addressing that and really looking at it's all cyclical, right? We take care of this part, we take care of this part.
Everything in the forest is the forest.
That part.
And speaking of awareness and waking up, I mean, Me Too was a blessing because it awakened all of us to this reality. And it was pointed and targeted at men for being the perpetrators, and rightfully so. But there's a defensiveness, like, oh shit, like now I need to hide all my shame from it, as opposed to further opening up and saying, okay, I am part of this, but it's also a soup that we're all in. And we all have something to contribute to heal this part of our culture.
And with Me Too, there was also the double standard of it being about women who had been traumatized and abused. And there was this collective moment where I felt like everyone, men and women, wanted to really raise their hand and go, this is what happened to me. But the men, as we saw play out, you know, we had to, in some ways, wait in line. Those are rites of passages for gender, you know, relations and all of that. But I feel like what these movements also do is you end up with these, you know, these opportunities to really like see the issue, see the problem, address it, and then connect and do it in relationship and community. But oftentimes it seems like people end up doing the work alone to the point where they end up a castaway on that island that you were speaking of. Instead of building a boat with people and arriving to shore, they end up on their own island, protected.
That's modern therapy too. Like going to a room by yourself with a therapist and then just, you know, indulge on your intellectual, you know, navel gazing. As opposed to, which I find there's a lot of talking in our group, but there's also a physicality and there's like sparring emotionally and it's layered. And I get to, sometimes I don't say anything, I just get to watch other men work through conflict or whatever they're going through personally, and I get to learn, I get the downloads from just experiencing them, not in isolation.
Just to add to this conversation, because one of the things you're saying is men's work. And there's still stigma around that. And so for anybody listening that's still listening going like, that's not for me. One thing, because I work with, military first responders, a lot of like the hard. And when I ask this question, it's like, hey, which one's harder? Is it harder to put it in a box and just go deal with your life and not deal with it? Or is it harder to actually go in, go through all the mess, go figure out what's going on, take an evaluative look at yourself, that self-awareness? It's much harder to go into the uncomfortable. And what does a lot of us identify as strong men? So we don't want to do what we appear as weak, but what's weaker? It's weaker to not deal with things. Yeah. It's weaker to put it in a box and keep living your life. It actually takes more courage, more strength, more power to look at that and feel that. And so I just wanted to share that for anybody listening that's like, they're dismissing a little.
Look at yourself was one of the expansions of mindfulness awareness, but then to be witnessed and to be seen by your brothers or your community, that can be very uncomfortable. To just be plainly open with who you are and what you are, even all that stuff that may be uncomfortable.
Well, and I think to that point, that's where the lineage of men's work comes from. There's ritual, there's containers you built. You build a container that creates safety, that everybody subscribes to this container. We're stepping into this container, we're gonna do this work together, and everybody abides by these values or this structure. And if you have that type of structure, now men feel safe to say, okay, we're all coming in, it's confidential, nothing leaves this space. We all have permission to be our authentic selves, and then we ask permission for how to show up. And so you're not just sharing with anybody openly, you're sharing in very specific containers where you're following lineages of ritual practice to actually create safety to go there. And it doesn't leave, right? That's part of the ritual. Or you're not doing men's work, right? I think that's the opposite side where people just express openly. That's not really.
It's like building a fire in tribal communities. The men would build the fire in the container of the fire, and the women would start the fire. And so creating that container so that the fire doesn't spread out of hand and become a forest fire, but is contained and safe. It's still wild and crazy and hot, but it's contained.
Yes, truth.
You, in many ways, how do I say this? You're the de facto leader of the group. Not to call you out, but you started this thing. You were very, you're the reason why we are all together as a men's group. I want you to talk a little bit, thank you first of all. I'm sure we're all very grateful that you had the vision for creating this group and the ability to bring it together in the way you did. Can you talk a little bit about that? The idea to make a men's group, to bring us all in, how it worked, and how maybe it's a learning moment for the audience that if they want to build their own group, if they're Preston Smiles and they're like, I want to build a group, how do they do it?
I'll start with, there are certain principles that I live by. And one of them is an understanding that it's not my job to make it happen, but it's my job to welcome it, right? The it is relative. The it changes on a need-to-know basis. And so what I'm continuously doing is making myself available by way of my consciousness, cleaning out my own space and containers so that what I call spirit can use me. And the impetus of this coming together was I was haunted by it. There would be so many different conversations and things that came up with really powerful, epic men. And it always ended the same. It was like, oh, I wish I had a group, right? All the men I had spoken to. And then I started looking around at even the guys who I looked up to. And I was like, oh, none of them have true best friends like we used to when we were 7 and 9. And I kept getting the hit. This has to happen. And going to what we spoke about earlier, there's another principle I live by, which is move fast but not in a hurry. Right? Because when I'm in a hurry, I'm in scarcity. But fast is where I honor what's occurring and say yes to the yes. And so maybe the 5th time it came up, I was like, all right, I hear you. Whatever's beyond my current understanding, I feel something is wanting to be birthed. A little backstory, I've done this multiple times with multiple different things, including how I even got my start was community organizing, because I created something called the Love Mob, which was organized acts of love, and we would go do these things all over LA, and then it spread to San Diego and different parts of the world. And that was, again, one of those moments where I was like, oh, this is mine to bring forward. And so as I began to scan and think about who would I want to be friends with, who would I want to learn from, who would I want to be intimately connected to, that's where you all came in. And one by one, it was like, yes, yes. And I would just get these intuitive hits. I know a lot of men. I know a lot of epic dudes, but those guys aren't a part of this. It was, for me, spirit-led. And, you know, we're here in nature, and one of my favorite sayings is, the fruit doesn't belong to the tree, right? The fruit belongs to the ecosystem. And so, as the fruit of your consciousnesses came forward, I just said, yes, cut it off, yes, cut it off, yes. And as we speak about nature, there's a beautiful bee that's circling both of your heads.
We're sweet.
Yes. To finish that thought off, there wasn't much thought in it. I think that as men, we could get really caught up in getting ready to get ready and overthinking, overplanning, and overanalyzing. And I do my best to move out of my way and just say yes to what is occurring and trusting that I can't miss. I have a belief, this is mine, that there's no step I can take that's outside of God. So wherever I go, God is, love is, and that will produce. And sometimes it's going to produce things that may cause pain to myself and others. But then psychologically, I then sort of sit with, but what is pain? Right? Some of the most painful scenarios, some of the greatest rejection has produced some of the greatest direction in human history, self-included. So that's sort of it.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so out there, I suspect a lot of men are craving community, right? So I encourage the audience to take a stab, give it a whirl. Try seeking out the men that you look up to, or men that you aspire, would want to be, or think are operating at a high level, not in their business and killing it in the game, but spiritually, and invite them in. You know, I think more chances than not, you'd be surprised that they may need you.
Yes, yes.
I just want to pivot a little into a relevant topic, but specifically about fatherhood. I'm close to being a dad myself.
You are a dad right now.
I am a dad, but the baby is still in my wife's belly. But you know, I'm really so grateful that I've managed to do a number of years of personal development, men's work, so that I can step into the father that I know I can be now. I have a running start, as opposed to now trying to figure it all out. I mean, I spent 2 years and I'm still got work to do, right? So, wow, I'm so glad that I'm here where I am now. Akira, you really inspired me a couple of years ago at our Temecula retreat when you told me about the birth of your child. And now I've gotten to know Osiris. He's been on our speed. Y'all are fans, I'm sure. But man, what an inspiring thing, because you were really honoring your wife and really looking at her with such great reverence. And I get that now. I'm so proud of my wife. And Preston, you have a few kids yourself. Joshua?
Not that I know of.
One's in Romania.
But they're starting to become an inkling.
Well, I will say also, all of you men watching you as fathers has radically shifted my relationship and even what I'm doing as a man that's single. Like, oh, like I want family, and seeing how you guys model that is like amazing. So I mean, seeing the fatherhood that you do, like.
That's my point. Inspire,
Inspiration.
yes. it's not just that we're asking men to step up and be better men. We're also, I think, calling them to be fathers.
Yes, yeah. This idea of this like father frequency. Somebody told me that, you know, the moment you realize that you and your partner are pregnant or you might become a father, there's a father frequency or this kind of DNA that turns on. It's like, okay, I understand that. You know, I know I'm starting to feel the responsibility. Maybe there's some fear, maybe there's other things, but there really is something that shifts. And they say, like, when a child is born, a father is born. Or when a child is born, a mother is born. And you kind of fully step into that role as you embrace your child. But for me, that began the moment I realized that me and my wife were going to have a child. And we had a miscarriage the first time. So the second one was like just this miracle of a miracle, because we'd been there through all the like excitement and surprise and then the loss and the grief. So that was all coming to a head when I was watching my wife give birth to our son. And I think for me, like, I saw her and also everything she represented as a mother, and the potential of all women to be mothers, and knowing that all of our mothers were, you know, women who decided to come into that role. That's what hit me. And I was, you know, I was in a hospital room, but I could have been just like at the gates of heaven, just worshiping all that was every mother that's ever been there in the form of my wife giving birth to our son. And, you know, that changed me forever. I try to remind myself of that moment whenever things get too, you know, relaxed or there's tension between me and my wife, because that was the moment where, you know, that was my rite of passage.
You know, I have an interesting take, or somebody's asking me this at a party last night. I said, parenthood and children is amazing, piece of cake, at some level. Relationship, marriage, that's the more challenging piece. And when we look at our whole society and the divorce rate, and even the people who don't get divorced but stay together for 35 years, and the moment the kids go to college or X, Y, and Z, they break up and run away from each other. To me, that has also a really big effect on how we parent each other, ourselves, our children, across the board. And so, not to switch the subject, because to me, fatherhood is one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given. The moment we found out we were pregnant with Kingston, within, I'd say, 9 months, I had already doubled my income. There was this primal aspect of me that was like, I'm here to hunt, and I'd got a family to take care of now. And my no's became stronger, my yeses became stronger. Everything shifted the moment I recognized that that was a role that I was, you know, being gifted with. Like putting them to bed last night and reading, I wasn't reading them a story, I was making up a story. And watching their little faces and hiding under the covers and saying that the wolf is now tickling you, and they're like losing it. And that high is so good. Like, I feel so blessed to look at these little aspects of me, but also see that they came here to do, be, and have what they came here to do, be, and have. And like the attitudes, and, you know, I had poop on my hands at least 7 times in the last 5 days. Right? Like different people's poop has been on my hands, and it doesn't affect me at all because the love is so deep. And so that's what I'm, you know, anybody who's blessed to have that experience, and whether it is your biological child or not, when you love somebody deep, you love them, right? Like when I hear you talk about your goddaughter and how much love you have for her, to me, that's fatherhood, you know? I look at that and I go, Adrian's one of her fathers, right? And it's a really big deal. My stepdad, who's not my biological dad anywhere close to it, and they hated each other at some level. I went to him on Father's Day 2 years ago. I went to his house, and I sat him down. He's by himself in the house, 73 years old. And I said, bro, I know we didn't get along much when I was 16, 17 years old, and I was rebellious and all that stuff. But that summer that you made me work on that house when all my friends were hanging out and having fun, That changed me forever. Thank you for being my dad in that moment. Thank you for having the discipline to understand what I needed as a young man in that moment. He broke down in tears. We stood up and we hugged and we just cried, man. And it was like, oh, like I'm getting emotional right now. It's that stuff, right? It's that stuff. That man did not, you know, he came in and he took on that role, and I wasn't his blood child, but he treated me like it. And to me, that's what we all are. That's what we're doing. That's what I do with my clients. I have 60-something-year-old clients, and I hold them like the dad they didn't get.
I think this is the full circle. We started this conversation, and when you look at most trauma, it all points back down to childhood. And so us stepping into roles to father ourselves, father each other, and so that we can all be in community and like father and parent the next generations is reducing the loop that's happening. So I think this is the vitality converted to service and community and family.
We are going to take away what we're learning from each other and spread it out into the world and cultivate more of this. And also you guys, you're part of that halo effect. So step the fuck up, become a father, father a child that needs it. How do people get in touch with you? How do they follow you?
Joshua Michael Wenner. And so they can just reach me at joshuawenner.com. And I have a men's work called K4. It's a men's community. I also help veterans and first responders with Valor, Warrior Resiliency. And then I coach high achievers to find that are usually financially free, but are looking for emotional freedom to find that peace inside.
Yeah, for me, at Preston Smiles on anything, whether it's PrestonSmiles.com, at Preston Smiles on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever it is. And I'm just here to serve.
For those of you that don't know, because we don't always get to see Akira, but we do see his son, Akira is mastermind producer, creator of this show, Earth Speed. So you get to see his face now. Unfortunately, we have to cut around the sound. Akira, where do we find you?
Follow and share Earthspeed. I mean, Earthspeed has become one of my favorite productions that I've worked on because it fulfills all these different interests of mine. Nature connection, men's work.
Yeah, well, Joshua and Preston have amazing courses that y'all can look into taking yourself. If you don't know where to start, 2 great places to start. And then eventually at Earthspeed, we're gonna have offerings as well in the same space. Okay, well, thanks guys.
All right, thank you guys.
Boom.